All right, I'm here with our professor, Dr. John Lee, and talking about his new book from Mohr Siebeck, Christological Rereading of the Shema, Deuteronomy 6.4, and Mark's Gospel. This book you've been working on for some time. Tell me a little bit about how it came about, and we're so glad to see it.
Yeah, originally this was my PhD dissertation in Edinburgh. Actually, I did some research in Tübingen while writing this dissertation, and it was accepted by Mohr Siebeck like several years ago. I think it was at the beginning of 2012. I was just so delighted and I was just so honored to join this reputable series. But then when I tried to revise this for publication, I had the experience that the sense of dissatisfaction grew over and over again. So I happened to work on it for several years and revised it substantially and expanded it quite a bit. So this is a substantially revised and extended or expanded version. Probably I should have tried somewhat different approach in writing the second book rather than expanding this quite a bit like this. But in that process, I learned a lot. And the manuscript or the book as it appears right now is much better as compared to the original dissertation. So I'm satisfied about it.
Yeah, I've found that I've often observed that if someone has the opportunity to publish their dissertation, oftentimes if they have a little time to revise and expand it, it only gets stronger. And I'm sure that's the case with what you've done here. Well, those who might be watching this video, maybe you'll have some New Testament scholars, biblical studies scholars, but you also have just interested people, your students and others. Talk a little bit about what you've done in the book and why it might be of interest to even the non-New Testament scholar in terms of what you've put together here.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the overall sort of a strategy or development of my argumentation in a general way. Then I'm going to talk about potential takeaways from reading this book. So chapter 1 is introduction. I mean, I have a history of research that's typically expected for a monograph in a series like this, Bund 2. And then I have a description of methodology and argumentation strategy. And toward the end of chapter 1, I have a kind of additional section, which some people may not think to be necessary, but I have a setting of Mark's Gospel based upon which I exegete relevant passages. So I think that section can serve as a kind of introduction to Mark's Gospel. In the second chapter, which is on Second Temple Jewish monotheism with attention to first century and the time immediately before that, I describe nature and characteristic of Second Temple Jewish monotheism as firmly monotheistic. So there are some debates about that and what are the specifics to be considered in terms of interacting with the primary sources and secondary literature. So I've done that, and I try to prove and affirm that Second Temple Jewish monotheism is meaningfully and firmly monotheistic. And the third chapter is the chapter where I started talking about Mark's Gospel, where I talked about Mark chapter 12, in which we find a very interesting juxtaposition of the love commandment passage, which contains the Shema, Deuteronomy 6.4 and 5, directly quoted. So that is juxtaposed with so-called David's son passage, which quotes Psalm 110:1. So I started looking at it very intensely and very carefully as much as I could. And I showed, I think, that these two passages, especially the Shema quotation of Deuteronomy 6.4 and 5, and Psalm 110:1 as quoted directly in these two subsequent passages, those two must be read in conjunction with each other. Thus, I think the conclusion is in favor of a type of a meaningful Christological monotheism. So a couple of things noteworthy. Number one, Deuteronomy 6.4, the one God phraseology of that verse is well known, and it is alluded to, referenced implicitly in different parts of the New Testament. However, Deuteronomy 6.4 is never quoted directly outside of this pericope, Mark 12:28 through 34. Another thing about Psalm 110:1, which is quoted in the immediately following passage, Psalm 110:1 is, in fact, the most frequently quoted Old Testament passage in the New. So I think these two passages containing the direct citation of Deuteronomy 6.4 and the following, and Psalm 110:1 in these two neighboring passages, I think that is quite noteworthy on the part of Mark's original audience. And I think that is likely intentional on the part of the author. So I'm, I think, getting a little technical here, but I think this is an exciting observation that I could make early on. So Christological monotheism is a kind of generic category that I can assign about the outcome of my exegetical work across or combining these two Markan passages. That is 12:28 and the following, and verse 35 and the following. But that should be appreciated in connection to earlier mentions of monotheistic language in Mark's gospel. So in the 4th chapter of this book, I looked at two monotheistic references or Shema allusions in Mark's gospel. That is 2:7 and 10:18. And I engage exegetically and theologically with these passages and end up supporting my conclusion based upon the exegesis of Mark 12, thus affirming or confirming that Christological monotheism is in view in Mark's narrative. Chapter 5 is connecting the findings or conclusions of preceding chapters, especially chapters 3 and 4, talking about Mark's monotheistic language with Christology in view. I'm connecting that to Mark's narrative as a whole. So this chapter, the final chapter of this book, is not simply talking about monotheistic references, whether that is a quotation or allusions. Rather, I expand the scope and I talk about Mark's Christology in general, and also elaborate on the significance of the findings in the preceding chapters in view of, in connection to, in light of Mark's gospel as a whole. So I have various passages that are significant in Christological considerations of the second gospel. And hopefully this chapter will serve general audience as a type of introduction to Mark's Christology. So in summary, in terms of takeaways, I can say that the latter part of the first chapter, especially when I talk about setting up Mark's gospel, I think that portion can serve as a general introduction to Mark's gospel. Second chapter on Second Temple Judaism will serve as a survey on that very topic, which is important for understanding New Testament Christology. I'm talking about Second Temple Jewish monotheism or first century Jewish monotheism. Chapters 3 and 4 will hopefully exemplify some reliable and solid exegetical work on specific passages with attention to Mark's monotheistic language. And chapter 5, the final chapter, will hopefully serve as an introduction, reliable introduction to Mark's Christology. That is the chapter that I'd like to develop later into a separate book by expanding it, nuancing my discussions, and adding more interaction with other scholars.
That's wonderful. I hope that you can. And of course, any exploration of what you say, meaningful Christological monotheism, is really valuable. So I think you'll help readers to see some of these clear connections that are being made through your exegesis. So thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for taking some time to talk about this new book, and I hope many people will take a look at it.
Thank you very much.